The biggest threat to Americans is not jihadists overseas. It's homegrown domestic terrorists inspired by white supremacists.
The gravest terrorist threat to the homeland is domestic violent extremism.
Domestic terrorism is our number one threat.
Domestic terrorism has been steadily increasing, and that threat needs to be addressed.
Domestic terrorist groups are really starting to surge in this country. It's a big concern.
We know that domestic terrorism is a grave threat, but what can we do to stop it?
What we need is to take the laws we already have and apply them to white people.
We can go after international terrorists. Why can't we do it at home?
Today, we're mostly looking at our neighbors rather than a Osama bin Laden that's far off in Afghanistan.
Bin Laden and co. didn't have supporters and sympathizers among the House Republican caucus.
The Republican Party is basically a domestic terrorist cell at this point, and they should be treated as such.
There are elements of the GOP that are starting to look like the jihadists.
Al-Qaeda wasn't umbilically linked to the American conservative movement in the way that these domestic extremists clearly are.
Domestic terrorists vote and international terrorists don't.
MAGA and the domestic terror threat is much more worrisome than any foreign threat.
Al-Qaeda wasn't white, and white terrorists have a certain advantage, a certain, what's the word I'm looking for? Privilege. White terrorists don't cause widespread fear or panic in the same way that brown terrorists with big beards tend to.
It is domestic white terror that is the greatest threat to our way of life.
Right-wing domestic violent extremism is the single greatest threat facing this country.
There is a serious right-wing domestic terrorism problem in this country.
President Trump is gone, right? And the extremists are not.
The Republican Party is the getaway driver for these domestic terrorists.
What I would call MAGA terrorists.
You're either with them or with us.
You have a Republican Party that sits mute while domestic terrorists plot the next overthrow of the U.S. government.
I don't think we've improved much since the Oklahoma City bombing. In fact, I think we may be in a worse position.
There are 100 McVeighs out there that are thinking about a bombing or thinking about an attack, and it's a much more dangerous landscape than any time in the last several decades.